Hey everybody, this is my 125 gallon native tank, and tonight is the night that I'm finally going to get in there and do some maintenance. We're going to get that glass all cleaned up. I'm going to change the filter, and I don't know how much of the green growth and everything that's in the tank right now I'm actually going to be able to deal with while we're in there today. So we will get the glass cleaned up, and that will make a huge difference. You can see right now that the filter is barely putting any water out, so that will make a huge difference. But I have just got a ton of green swamp-like growth growing on everything. One of the things that I'm starting to find is that the water sprite on the surface here is just sort of packing together in clumps, and then I get the cyanobacteria growing in it, and it gets nibbled and chewed on by the fish, so it never really amounts to be whole plants. It's all these little bits and pieces and chewed up pieces. I guess this section here is not a bad sized plant, but it never really looks like a plant. It always just looks like little bits of detritus and bits of chewed up leaves and stuff on the surface. So I don't know how much I like that and whether or not I'm going to do anything about it or not, but we will see. The main thing I want to do is just do a nice hardy water change on it and really get that glass cleaned up, because that's where most of the green look of the tank is coming from. It's all coming from that glass, not the inside of the tank so much. And the water itself, I've checked on several occasions now, the water itself is nice and clear. We don't even have a whole lot of tannins in the water. I will take a sample of the water while we're in there, and we'll be able to look at it in a clear container and see how tannin stained it actually is. But I don't even think it's got that much tannins in it. I've got a pound of activated carbon in the filter right now, and that is helping to keep the tannins to a minimum, as well as pull the old medication that I had in this tank from a week or two ago when I was in there doing a treatment for some sick fish. I had freshwater velvet in this tank, and now that I'm done treating, I've got the carbon in the filter. So tonight's the night we're going to take the carbon out of the filter. We're going to get that filter all cleaned up, and most importantly, for our visual point of view anyway, is we're going to get that glass wiped down. So consider this part your before, and there's your after. So got a little bit to talk about since I got in there and did what I did. So let's get started on it. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the big old branch you can see sitting on top there. And that is the piece of wood that was originally supposed to sort of simulate a fallen tree, and I had it in the tank pretty much in the position it's in now, except obviously this end down here went down into the tank, and the whole thing was fully submerged. The root mass down here, if you want to call it that, was kind of up against the glass inside the tank. And so when I rescaped it and put this giant piece of wood in there, I took a lot of the pieces of wood that were currently in there out, and that one wound up going on the floor. And I sort of forgot about it, and it's a really cool piece of wood. I shot a video about the day I collected it. I don't even know if I could even find that or not. If I do, maybe I'll attach it there. It's more one of my outdoors videos than a fish keeping video, so only if you're interested in my outdoor videos, you'd be interested in checking that one out if I could find it. But regardless, I like it. It's a cool piece of wood. It's got some history. You know, I found it with my own two eyeballs, dug it out of the muck and the mud on the side of the river, and brought it home and cleaned it up. And it's been in the tank for so long, it's now worn down considerably. It was a lot more rooty when I brought it home, and now it's all sort of withered away and rotted away, but it's still pretty cool, so why not just throw it on there. And I'm hoping it may also act as a bit of a trellis. If you'll notice, I took all of that creeping Jenny that I had sort of draped over this, and I was hoping would, you know, I'd sort of get some roots growing off one end and maybe some flowing growth off the other. Well, I wasn't getting any of that. I was getting some rotten, nasty looking stuff up here, and it just wasn't working out. So now what I'm trying to do is I've got some of the ends of the creeping Jenny tucked down underneath of this mass of water sprite. This water sprite is actually tucked into a hole in this piece of wood, so that's anchored in place. And then if I can get this to sort of root in, and I'm hoping I can get it to maybe grow up and onto some of this wood, and if I can get it to grow up here, this can act almost as a trellis for me to get some creeping jenny growing up there, which I think would be pretty cool. The creeping jenny is a light-loving plant, so I think that will do well. Because keep in mind, all of these plants that you can see I've got sitting right up against the surface, all of these Java ferns, even the water sprite really is not really a light needing plant. And then I get down to where I've got my well, honestly, you can't really even see them anymore because they're all sort of melted away, but I tucked a few Anubias down in here, and I was hoping I'd get some actual emergent growth from the Anubias, and we may, but it's just going to take a while for the Anubias to adjust to this tremendous amount of light I've added to it. I went from having, admittedly, I did have two of these same lights on it, but I had them sitting at this end, and they were on the glass hood, and then this whole end of the tank was lit with nothing more than an LED shop light, which lighted it, you know, plenty well enough to see into, but it wasn't a huge amount of light. And it also was on the glass hoods, and those glass hoods, as soon as they start growing gunk on them, it blocks so much of that light out you wouldn't believe it. So what we're stuck with now, or what we ended up with now, I should say, this is what I wanted, not what we're stuck with, taking all that off and then adding all of that light directly above it, it's a huge amount of light I added to the tank compared to what it was. So we're going to go through some shifting and changing, and you know how much algae that grows in the tank is going to change. You know, so we're just going to have to deal with that as we go along. So what I did today while we were in there is I sprayed with hydrogen peroxide. You can see the line where I drain the water down to. It's exactly right where those bubbles stop, and that is where I sprayed hydrogen peroxide all over that. That's why this is looking a little bit sort of foamy and grungy in there. So I don't know how much good it did, but it certainly helped to beat some of it back. I don't know how effective using a ChemiClean treatment on this tank would be, because I really think most of this is algae. So I need to get another good algae eating fish in the tank now that that Chinese algae eater died. And as much as I can't believe I'm saying this, I've actually considered getting another Chinese algae eater. I think the most watched video I've ever posted was my video where I swore I'd never get another Chinese algae eater. And here it is just a few years later, and I'm already kind of considering the idea of getting one. You know, again, under the circumstances, the tank it would be going into, the purpose it would be serving, that sort of thing. I don't know. It's an idea. It popped into my head. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not really seriously considering it at this point. Somebody mentioned Pandagarras, and I had some of them in the past, but I found them to be kind of aggressive too. They did the sort of latching on, you know, trying to get the slime coat off of slower moving fish. And I wasn't really digging that. And that's what my, you know, Chinese algae eater, that's why I had so many problems with that. It killed some of my angelfish by getting on and trying to get the slime coat off of them. So anyway, I need to get some kind of algae eating fish in the tank. But while I was in there, I did get the glass all wiped down. I did spray the hydrogen peroxide on whatever was exposed above the surface during the water change. And the filter was not very dirty at all. The flow being reduced was not coming from the filter being clogged up, which I didn't think it should have been. I just replaced it not long ago. And when I got back to the tank, I decided it must be the intake, which is back behind there, and we can't see at the moment. So I pulled that off. It was indeed somewhat clogged up. I cleaned it out and put it all back together and got it up and running. And you can see we're no more vigorous water flow than we had before. So I think what is going on is the actual inside mechanisms where the impeller and the pump and all that stuff is just all grunged up and dirty, and I'm going to need to get in there and pull all that apart. But what further is going on is all of the trays in this tank, the part that forces the water to the bottom, are almost destroyed from the UV light. I don't use the UV light anymore, but when I first got the filter I did, and I've looked and looked and looked, and I've never been able to find replacement trays that were economically feasible. For the price of replacing the trays, it's 3/4 of the cost of buying an entire new filter. So if anybody, well, it's too late because I've already ordered it. Long story short, I know it's too late for that, but long story short is I ordered a new filter, and I'm going from this one, which is actually a Sun 404B. It's a little bit different. It's a little taller and slimmer. But same volume and capacity and everything else. I'm not really sure why they make the 404B as opposed to their popular one. The one that almost everybody buys is the 304B. So that's what I ordered, is a 304B to replace it. I'll put a link down below to the one I got, because for an extra $10 you can get all of the biomaterial and some extra coarse sponges to go with it, and it still comes in at under $100. So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are going to throw out their recommendations for other filters that I could use or whatever. But I've been using the Sun filters for years. Again, the 304B is the most common one that I've used, but I've used the 404B, and I have used the 303B, which I've used on some of my smaller tanks, like my 40 breeders. And again, I wouldn't even bother with that. I just go with the 304B. It works on tanks all the way up to this 125. I don't have any issue with it. And then you can even use it on a 40, where you might be a little on the heavy water flow side for a 40, but it's still doable. It's just a great all-around filter, and it's basic and simple and functional. You know, all I need in a filter is a way to suck water out of the tank, a canister to have my biomedia and filter material in, and then a way for the water to flow back into my tank. Anything beyond that is gravy. You know, it's nice to have, but it's not necessary. And for the cost and the use I get out of them, I just, you know, I've heard a lot of complaints about the Sun filters over the years, and I just don't see it. I love my Sun filters. I've bought many of them for all my tanks, and I just bought a new replacement for this one because, as I said, the trays are all messed up, and the inside of it needs to be cleaned out. And the last time I checked it, the tube that houses the UV light was actually all full of water, so the seal in that's probably broken. And after the, I don't know, 4 years I've been using that filter or whatever, it's time to just go ahead and replace it. So we've got a new filter on the way. I'm not sure about the ChemiClean treatment. Like I said, I think when I look down here at stuff like this, you know, you can see that bright green, almost a sheeting sort of look over the surface of the Anubias leaves. That looks like something that the ChemiClean would treat. And even some of this brighter green stuff you can see on the woodwork here. So I'm guessing that we've probably got a combination of cyanobacteria as well as the hair algae growing in here. Some of that just looks way too bright green, you know, and sheeting to be hair algae. So we'll think about it. And again, I use the ChemiClean from time to time in most of my tanks at some point or another. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't want to do it in this one. So I can't think of anything else to go over during that water change. We will talk about, I did want to show you, I know this video is running way longer than I expected it to, but I did want to show you the water. You can actually see that, well, you can't really see it here, it's not showing up, but when I looked at it over my white washing machine, there is surprisingly more tannins in this water than we're getting the impression of right now. Maybe if we look at it against the ceiling, not really. But there is a lot more tannin in that water than you would think. And I had a pound of activated carbon in the filter. And it had been in there for, I don't know, a week to 10 days or something like that. So that's significant. It was still, I would imagine, still removing tannins to some degree, but, you know, it can only do so much. And so after that long, we were starting to get a little bit of buildup of tannins for whatever that's worth. Again, I will put my thoughts together a little more fully, and we'll go over the idea of like using the activated carbon in your filter, whether you use it or not, so on and so forth. Anyway, make sure you're subscribed. That way you won't miss anything I got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. And then don't forget, of course, this one is my 125-gallon native tank. So thanks again, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.